When silence filled the hall, the lights inside the grand hall were bright, almost blinding, yet there was a deep silence that felt heavier than the air itself. Thousands of people had gathered, not for a normal award night, not for a simple celebration, but for something different, something that could only be described as a rare meeting of hearts and history. Every seat was filled, every corner had a camera pointed, and still the crowd waited. No one was speaking. No one dared to break the tension. The doors at the far end opened, and the sound of quiet footsteps echoed against the marble floor. When the first figure appeared, people gasped. It was Keanu Reeves. He walked slowly, his black suit simple yet elegant, his expression calm, humble, and quiet. He didn't wave his hands or raise his head proudly. Instead, his eyes remained soft, almost as if he was carrying something far heavier than fame. He looked like a man who knew pain, but also a man who carried kindness as his shield. Behind him, another figure stepped into view, Robert Downey Jr. He carried a different energy, yet the hall reacted with the same breathless silence. Robert had always been known for his charisma, his quick wit, and the way he could control a crowd with a single sentence. But tonight was different. His eyes didn't hold the usual spark of humor. They held something deeper, something that made people lean forward in their seats without realizing it. Keanu and Robert walked side by side, and that was when the silence became heavier. People who normally cheered, screamed, or clapped could not move their voices past their lips. They were watching not just two stars, but two men who had lived through storms, who had fallen and risen again, and who now stood together carrying invisible scars. The first 5 minutes of that moment could have been mistaken for hours. The cameras captured every detail, the gentle way Keanu moved his hand, as if steadying himself with calm strength, the firm yet thoughtful steps of Robert, and the way their presence together seemed to pull the hall into one heartbeat. Then the whispers began. Why were they here together? What had brought them both to this hall side by side on this night? People searched each other's faces for answers, but no one knew. And maybe that was what made the silence so powerful. It was mystery, mixed with respect. In the front row, a young boy who had been battling cancer sat with his mother. His eyes widened as he watched Keanu look toward him, nod softly, and then smile in the most gentle way possible. The boy's hand tightened around his mother's fingers. It was as if he had been given strength without words. A kind of hope that only comes when someone you admire sees you. Really sees you. But even as that small moment passed, a different kind of tension began to rise. Not everyone in the hall was there to celebrate. Not everyone carried admiration. Hidden among the applause that never came were people with doubts. People who had questioned these men for their choices, their pasts, and their mistakes. Some eyes were filled with judgment, waiting for one wrong step, one wrong word, so they could whisper, "See, they are not as perfect as you think." Keanu and Robert reached the center of the stage. The host stood nearby, but even he seemed unable to speak. His script trembled in his hands. What words could match this silence? What introduction could equal the weight of two men who had both carried the burden of loss, the fire of addiction, the sting of criticism, and yet still chosen to live with kindness and humility? Robert leaned closer to the microphone first. His voice was calm, not loud, not trying to demand attention, but simply there. Sometimes, he said, life teaches us lessons in the hardest ways. Sometimes it breaks us down, takes everything away, and asks us who we are without the lights, without the applause, without the masks. Tonight is not about us standing here. It is about what we learned when we were at our lowest. The hall did not move. Some people swallowed hard. Others blinked quickly, fighting back emotions they didn't expect to feel. Then Keanu's voice joined. It was softer, but somehow even stronger because of its honesty. When we fall, we have two choices, he said. We either let the darkness shape us into something bitter, or we carry kindness even when it feels heavy. I lost people I loved, and for a long time, silence was my only companion. But silence can also teach us. It can remind us that no matter how far we fall, we can still rise if we hold on to respect, to humility, to love. The young boy in the front row smiled again. His mother cried silently. But just as the hall seemed united in that fragile moment, something unexpected happened. In the back rows, a group of critics who had long spoken against both men began whispering loudly. One of them even stood, challenging their words. "You talk about kindness, but you are men of privilege. You talk about humility, but look at this hall. Look at this stage. Is this humility, or is this just another performance?" The air snapped. Tension filled the room. The silence that had been respectful now became sharp, dangerous. Cameras turned toward the disruption, flashes went off, and people held their breath. Robert and Keanu did not flinch. Instead, they shared a glance. In that single glance, it was clear. They knew this moment was coming. They knew that not everyone would understand. And so Keanu took one small step forward. His voice remained calm. "Humility is not about hiding from the world. It is about standing here, being honest about your mistakes, and still choosing to serve kindness even when it is easier to fight back with anger." His words fell heavy. The man in the back row clenched his fists, but he could not answer. The crowd remained tense, caught between doubt and belief, waiting to see what would happen next. And that is where the story truly begins, because what followed that silence, that confrontation, would test not only Keanu and Robert, but everyone who believed in the strength of kindness over pride. When questions turned into fire, the hall was no longer the same. What began as respectful silence now felt like a storm held back by thin glass. One man's words had cracked that glass, and everyone inside felt the tension pressing against their skin. The man who stood in the back row crossed his arms, his voice echoing again, sharper, louder this time. "You speak of kindness? But where was that kindness when you rose higher while others stayed broken? You speak of humility, but you walk this stage dressed as kings. Do you think your pain is greater than ours? Do you think your loss makes you holy?" Gasps spread across the hall. Some people shook their heads in disbelief. Others stared at the man, half afraid, half curious. They wanted to know how Keanu and Robert would respond. Was this the moment the silence of respect would shatter into chaos? Keanu's eyes softened, but his body stood firm. He looked not like a man about to fight, but like a man prepared to carry the weight of another's anger. His silence lasted a moment longer than expected, and that silence was louder than any reply. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady and calm. "You are right to question. You are right to doubt. Pain does not belong to one person. It belongs to us all. I do not stand here to prove I suffered more than you or less. I stand here to say pain should never be wasted. If pain teaches us, then it can turn into kindness. If it does not, then it becomes chains around our hearts." Robert stepped forward now, his energy different but equally controlled. He placed his hand lightly on the microphone, leaned in, and spoke with a voice that carried both iron and gentleness. "You think humility is about what clothes we wear or what stage we stand on. I thought that once too, but then I lost everything. When you have nothing, when you are laughed at, when doors are closed in your face, you learn humility is not about being poor or being rich. It is about remembering that everyone you meet is carrying a story, and you are no greater than them. Fame did not give me humility. Failure did." The words hit the hall like quiet thunder. The critics in the back row shifted in their seats. Some looked down. Others whispered among themselves. The man who had spoken first clenched his jaw but stayed standing. The audience, however, was pulled deeper into the moment. This was not the polished speech of actors pretending to inspire. This was raw. This was real. The trembling hands of the host proved it. The tears in the eyes of strangers proved it, and the quiet, still figure of the young boy in the front row proved it most of all. The boy, fragile yet brave, lifted his hands slowly into the air. No one told him to. No one expected him to. But in that hall filled with adults, cameras, and critics, it was his small voice that broke the air next. "I believe you," he said, his words soft but so clear that even the microphones picked them up. "Because when you looked at me, I felt it. You were not looking at a sick boy. You were looking at me like I mattered." The crowd turned. All eyes went to the boy. His mother covered her mouth, her eyes wet with tears. Keanu knelt down from the stage, lowering himself so that his eyes were level with the boy's. The cameras zoomed in, catching every detail of his expression. Gentle, open, human. "You do matter," Keanu said, "more than any of us on this stage. More than the applause, more than the lights. You matter because you are here, you are breathing, you are fighting, and that makes you stronger than me." The boy's lips trembled and a faint smile appeared. His mother whispered, "Thank you," though her voice barely reached the stage. And then, unexpectedly, Robert followed Keanu's gesture. He sat down too, lowering himself until he was on the same level as the boy, despite the expensive suit, despite the cameras. "I once thought I was invincible," Robert said, his voice steady. "But then I realized strength is not about winning battles. Strength is about surviving the ones no one sees. You are a warrior, and tonight you are my teacher." The hall broke, not with noise, not with shouts, but with tears. People wiped their eyes openly. The cameras caught faces both famous and unknown, crying without shame. But in the middle of this wave of emotion, the critics in the back row did not sit. They did not weep. Their eyes hardened instead, as though the vulnerability on stage had challenged them in ways they could not accept. The first critic finally sat down, but his silence was not surrender. It was planning. And while the rest of the audience felt healed, moved, and inspired, a shadow was beginning to spread in the corner of the hall. The lights dimmed slightly as the next part of the program was about to begin, but even the organizers sensed something unusual. Nothing about tonight was going according to script, and that was when the true twist revealed itself. A man in a dark suit walked slowly toward the stage from the side entrance. He was not on the guest list, but security did not stop him. His face was familiar, not to the audience, but to Keanu and Robert. Both men froze for a heartbeat, because this was no stranger. This was someone from their past. Someone who carried memories both painful and unfinished. Someone who had the power to turn this night from a moment of respect into a battlefield of truth. The hall fell silent once again, every heart waiting to see what storm this man would bring. When the past walked into the light, the man in the dark suit walked slowly, each step echoing against the polished floor. It was not the confident stride of someone used to fame, nor the shy steps of someone overwhelmed by the moment. It was something else, measured, heavy, deliberate, like every step carried the weight of years. The hall fell deeper into silence. Even the sound of cameras clicking seemed to fade. Keanu's expression shifted. His calm eyes narrowed just slightly, the way a man reacts when he sees a ghost wearing flesh. Robert's usual warmth was gone, too. His face tightened, the smile erased, his jaw set as if he was bracing for impact. Whatever connection they had with this man, it was not casual. It was history. The audience leaned forward. No one knew him, at least not in this setting. He wasn't another actor, nor a political figure, nor someone the media could instantly recognize. But his presence burned with familiarity for the two men on stage. He stopped at the foot of the stage, not asking for permission, not waiting for invitation. Instead, he lifted his chin and looked at both Keanu and Robert with eyes that spoke of bitterness and wounds that had never healed. "So," the man said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the silence. "Here you are. Two men praised for kindness and humility. Two men the world bows to tonight. But do they know the truth? Do they know what you left behind? Do they know the cost of your so-called kindness?" Gasps rolled through the crowd. People glanced at one another nervously. This was no scripted moment. This was raw, unscheduled, unpredictable. Keanu stepped forward slightly, his voice calm, though his chest rose and fell more quickly than before. "This isn't the time or the place," he said softly but firmly. The man's lips curled into something between a smile and a sneer. "Oh, it's the perfect time. Because humility is not words on a stage, Keanu. Humility is facing what you've tried to forget." Robert's hand gripped the edge of the microphone stand. For a moment, it looked like he might stop this, cut the moment off before it spun out of control. But instead, he took a deep breath, leaned forward and said, "Then say it. If you came here to drag the past into the light, then say it. The hall deserves to hear. We deserve to face it." The man climbed the first step of the stage. Security finally moved, their instincts kicking in. But Keanu raised his hand slightly, stopping them. His signal was simple. Let him speak. The man's name was revealed in a voice that trembled from someone in the third row. "That's Alex Mercer," a whisper escaped. "Wasn't he?" The rest of the sentence was never finished, but recognition spread. Alex Mercer, once an actor too, years ago, once a rising name in the industry. But then he had disappeared, faded into silence, his career crumbling while others rose. Alex Mercer stood before them now, the lost star returned. His eyes burned, not with the joy of reunion, but with the fire of resentment. "You talk about resilience," Alex said, his voice growing louder. "But where was resilience when I needed a hand? When I was drowning, you two looked away. When the industry chewed me up and spat me out, you chose silence. You talk about kindness, but your kindness did not reach me. And because of that, my life turned into ashes." The hall went still. Whispers returned louder this time. The story was changing. The perfect image of the night was cracking. The critics in the back row straightened, their eyes gleaming with satisfaction. This was the chaos they had been waiting for. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, as if replaying memories buried deep. Then he opened them again, meeting Alex's burning gaze. "You're right," Keanu said, his tone heavy, honest. "I should have been there. I failed you as a friend. I saw you fall, and I didn't reach out the way I should have. And I have carried that regret with me." The crowd gasped again, but this time not from anger. This was shock at such raw confession. Alex's face faltered for a second, but then hardened again. "Regret doesn't erase years, Keanu. Regret doesn't give me back what I lost. It doesn't give me back the nights I went hungry, the days I sat in silence while you stood on red carpets." Robert finally spoke, his voice breaking through with sharp honesty. "And you think we didn't regret it too? Alex, I was fighting my own demons. I was drowning in my own chaos. I couldn't even save myself back then, let alone someone else. I'm not proud of it, but it's the truth. I abandoned you because I couldn't carry anyone else when my own life was crumbling." The hall's air thickened. People sat motionless, trapped between two sides of a story they never knew existed. This was no longer a performance. It was confession, confrontation, and revelation all at once. Alex's hands trembled slightly, though his voice stayed hard. "So now you stand here as heroes, and I am the forgotten one. Tell me, where is the kindness in that?" Keanu's eyes glistened with the faint trace of unshed tears. His voice came out low, almost whispering. "The kindness is here, Alex. Right now, because I will not walk away from you again. I will not let this night end without facing you, without telling you in front of the world, I failed you, but I will not fail you now." For the first time since stepping into the hall, Alex faltered. His lips parted, but no words came. The silence stretched, heavier than ever. And then something unexpected happened. The young boy in the front row, fragile yet strong, spoke again. "Sometimes people make mistakes," he said softly. "But kindness is when you forgive them anyway." The hall gasped. Even Alex turned toward the boy, his anger meeting innocence. His lips trembled again, but his eyes softened for just a heartbeat. But that moment of softness was fragile, too fragile. And just as the audience leaned toward hope, the critics in the back row stood again, their voices loud and sharp. "Forgive? Is that all this is? Words of regret and a child's forgiveness? No, this is not humility. This is theater. This is weakness." The hall erupted in noise, half gasps, half protests, half silence trying to smother the storm. The night was no longer about speeches or awards or applause. It had become something else, and in the middle of that chaos, Keanu, Robert, and Alex stood locked in a triangle of past wounds, present truths, and a future that could break or heal depending on the next words spoken. When truth burned brighter than lights, the noise inside the hall was no longer controlled. It spread like fire through dry wood. Whispers, gasps, sharp voices, and nervous laughter echoed across the walls. Some people covered their mouths, others shook their heads, while the critics stood tall, their faces twisted with satisfaction. They wanted this night to collapse, to end not in respect, but in shame. On the stage, 3 men stood in silence. Keanu's calm face was cracked with sorrow. Robert's eyes were sharp and restless, and Alex's expression burned with the weight of old wounds. It felt as if the hall had transformed into a courtroom, and every soul inside was both the jury and the witness. The host, who had been forgotten in the storm, tried to step forward, microphone trembling in his hand. Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps we should— But Robert's hand raised, stopping him. His voice, steady yet heavy, filled the hall. No, we will not run from this. Not tonight. The hall froze. The camera zoomed closer. Keanu gave a slight nod, as if agreeing, as if knowing that the only way through the storm was to face it, not avoid it. Alex's voice rose again, but this time it was not just anger. It carried a crack, the kind of fracture only years of silence can create. Do you know what it's like to be erased? He asked. Do you know what it's like to knock on doors and every door closes because you're no longer useful? While the world cheered for you, I sat in a room with nothing but shadows. I begged for one phone call, one word, one sign that I was not forgotten. And it never came. The crowd went still. Even the critics quieted, sensing the rawness of his confession. Robert followed. His suit sharp, his presence commanding, he too stepped down, lowered himself before Michael and Alex, and bowed. The hall erupted. Some gasped, some cried, some clapped, and some shouted in disbelief. But no one could look away, because in that moment, the two men who had been placed on the highest stage chose to kneel in humility, not as actors, not as heroes, but as flawed men seeking forgiveness, and as the cameras captured the image, the world watching outside that hall would see something it had never expected. Respect shown not in power, but in surrender. When forgiveness was tested, the sight of Keanu and Robert kneeling on the polished floor of the grand hall burned itself into the minds of every soul present. Cameras flashed, yet even the photographers forgot their jobs for a heartbeat. The critics, who had waited for humiliation, now found themselves staring at something unexpected. Two of the most celebrated men in the world lowering themselves before broken friendships. Stripped of pride, stripped of power. Alex's face twisted with shock. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his trembling hands covering his mouth as if trying to hide the storm inside him. This was not the scene he had imagined. He had wanted answers, confessions, maybe even apologies, but this was more than words. This was surrender. Michael's eyes hardened, but his jaw trembled. He stood still, his figure stiff, his hands clenched at his sides. The years of silence, the years of betrayal, all screamed inside him. And yet here before him were men who once stood untouchable, bowing low, admitting fault not in whispers, but in front of the world. The hall itself felt alive, like a single body holding its breath. Some of the audience wept openly, tears rolling unchecked down their cheeks. Others sat frozen, caught between admiration and disbelief. The boy in the front row stared wide-eyed, his thin body trembling with emotion, while his mother wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Keanu lifted his head slightly, his voice low but clear. Forgive me not because I deserve it, but because I can never take back the pain I caused. Forgive me because if you don't, then I remain chained and you remain chained too. Let us break those chains tonight. Robert's voice followed, raw and unsteady, yet filled with a kind of fire no performance could fake. We cannot change the past, Michael. We cannot rewrite the night we failed you. But we can choose what we do now. If humility means anything, it means choosing to stand not above you, but beside you. I am asking, not as Robert Downey Jr., but as a man, let me stand beside you again. The words hung in the air, heavy, powerful, dangerous. Alex took a step back, his entire body shaking. His eyes burned with unshed tears. He wanted to forgive, but the pain was deep, the wound too old to close with one gesture. Do you think this makes it easy? He cried. Do you think kneeling takes away the nights I went hungry? The years I was invisible? Do you think words can erase the silence that destroyed me? His voice cracked. The hall shuddered with his pain. Some in the audience sobbed quietly, others whispered prayers under their breath. Michael stepped closer, his voice harsh but trembling with emotion. Don't bow to me, he said sharply. Bowing doesn't erase betrayal. Show me change. Show me action. Words fade. Postures fade. What will you do tomorrow when the lights are off and the cameras are gone? Will you still stand with us then? Keanu's eyes glistened as he answered softly. Yes, tomorrow, the day after, and every day I breathe. Because humility means nothing if it lives only under bright lights. It must live in silence too, I will not abandon you again. The hall erupted into whispers once more. The critics scoffed, shaking their heads. Liars, one muttered loud enough for the microphones to catch. They will return to their fame, and the Mercers will return to their shadows. But just as doubt spread again, the boy in the front row stood. His legs wobbled, his small frame barely holding him, but he stood. His voice, fragile yet pure, carried louder than the critics. I believe them, he said, because I can see it in their eyes. I know what it feels like when someone is pretending, and they are not pretending. Please, forgive them. The hall went silent. No one breathed. No one moved. Alex's lips trembled. He looked at the boy, then at Keanu and Robert still kneeling, then at Michael, whose fists shook with anger and love all at once. Alex's voice broke into a sob as he whispered, All my life I thought I was forgotten. But maybe I wasn't forgotten, just lost in silence. Maybe tonight is not the end, but the chance to begin again. He took a step forward, and then another, until he stood directly before Keanu and Robert. The audience leaned forward as if drawn by gravity itself. Alex's hands shook violently as he reached out, first to Keanu, then to Robert. His voice cracked, almost inaudible. I forgive you. The hall exploded, not in chaos, but in thunderous applause, tears, and cries. People stood, clapping, sobbing, shouting, overwhelmed by the power of the moment. The boy smiled weakly, collapsing back into his seat, his mother holding him tight as tears of relief streamed down her face. But Michael did not move. His face was hard, his eyes unyielding. Forgiveness is not so easy, he said, his voice cold. Alex may forgive, but I am not Alex. I will not bow to words or to gestures. I want proof. I want action. I want to see if humility can survive after tonight. And with that he turned, walking slowly away from the stage. The hall gasped, the applause faltered, the hope dimmed just slightly. Keanu and Robert stood, their heads bowed, their hearts heavy. They had gained forgiveness from Alex. But Michael's shadow still loomed large, threatening to undo the fragile peace that had begun to form. The night was not finished. It was only moving into its most dangerous test yet. When humility proved stronger than silence, Michael's footsteps echoed like distant thunder as he walked away from the stage. The applause that had filled the hall moments earlier faltered into silence. The joy of Alex's forgiveness now trembled under the shadow of his brother's refusal. People shifted in their seats, unsure whether the night was ending in healing or in another wound too deep to close. Keanu's eyes followed Michael's back, heavy with sadness, but also determination. Robert clenched his jaw, his chest rising and falling with the weight of unfinished truth. Alex stood in the middle, torn between gratitude for the forgiveness he had just given and fear that his brother's heart would remain locked in anger. The critics smirked, whispering among themselves. One of them muttered loud enough for nearby microphones to catch, "See, this is what happens." Their words don't heal. Their humility is just theater. The poison in those words spread quickly, pulling doubt back into the room like smoke filling lungs. The boy in the front row coughed softly, his frail voice barely audible. "Don't let him walk away," he whispered, his mother squeezing his hand, her tear-filled eyes urging the same silent plea. Keanu heard it. He turned toward Robert, and without a word, both men stepped down from the stage. The cameras followed them, the entire hall leaning forward, every eye locked on their movements. They did not call Michael's name. They did not shout after him. Instead, they walked until they stood a few feet behind him. Keanu's voice, soft and steady, broke the silence. "Michael, humility is not shown in front of cameras. It is not shown in speeches. It is shown in footsteps. So tonight, if you will not return to us, then we will walk with you." Robert's voice followed, fierce yet trembling with honesty. "You don't trust us, and maybe you shouldn't, but we will not let you walk into the shadows alone. If the price of forgiveness is action, then action begins now, not tomorrow, not later. Now!" The hall gasped as both men stepped away from the spotlight, following Michael into the dimmer light of the aisle. Their expensive suits brushed against the knees of audience members, their polished shoes clapped against the marble. But none of it mattered. In that moment, Two of Hollywood's brightest stars chose to abandon the stage and follow a man who refused to forgive them. Michael stopped. His shoulders trembled. The camera zoomed in, capturing the tightness of his fists, the sharp rise and fall of his breath. He turned slowly, his eyes burning not just with anger but with confusion. "Why?" he demanded. "Why follow me? You have the applause, the lights, the world at your feet. Why step away for someone who does not even believe you?" Keanu's voice cracked, his eyes glistening. "Because if we only live for applause, then we are empty. Because humility is not real unless it costs us something. I would rather lose the lights and walk with you in darkness than stand alone on a stage." Robert's face twisted with emotion, his voice sharp with conviction. "You think forgiveness is about weakness, Michael? It's not. Forgiveness is about strength, the kind of strength it takes to choose love when anger is easier. You don't have to forgive us tonight. You don't even have to forgive us tomorrow. But we will stand with you until you believe that we mean this." The hall was silent again, so silent that every breath, every heartbeat felt like it echoed. Alex's eyes filled with tears as he watched his brother wrestle with the storm inside him. Michael's lips trembled. His eyes darted between Keanu, Robert, and Alex. His fists loosened, then clenched again. "You left me once," he whispered, his voice breaking. "What if you leave me again?" Keanu stepped closer, placing a trembling hand on his own chest. "Then let me say it here, in front of the world. I will not leave you again. If I do, then I am no man of humility, no man of kindness. Hold me to my word. Hold me until my last breath." Robert nodded, his eyes wet. "And me too. Hold me accountable, not as an actor, not as a star, as a man who once failed and refuses to fail again." The hall quivered with emotion. People sobbed openly now. Even some of the critics lowered their eyes, their smirks gone, their hearts shaken. Michael's tears finally fell. Years of anger, years of silence, cracked into pieces as he sank slowly to his knees. The crowd gasped. Alex rushed to him, wrapping his arms tightly around his brother. Keanu and Robert stood still, watching, their own tears streaming freely. Michael's voice, muffled against Alex's shoulder, broke through the hall. "I can't carry this anger anymore. I forgive you. I forgive you both." The hall erupted. Not in chaos, not in doubt, but in thunderous applause that shook the very walls. People rose to their feet, clapping, crying, shouting with joy. The boy in the front row smiled weakly, whispering, "They did it," before resting against his mother's arm in peace. Keanu reached forward, pulling Michael into an embrace. Robert joined, and for the first time in years, the four men stood together, not as actors, not as critics, not as forgotten names, but as brothers bound by something greater than fame. The cameras captured it all. But for once, the cameras didn't matter. What mattered was the truth. Humility had been proven not in words, not in speeches, but in action, in surrender, in love. The critics had no words left. The audience had no doubt left. The hall that had once trembled with division now shook with unity. And in that unforgettable night, when Keanu Reeves and Robert Downey Jr. stood with Alex and Michael Mercer, the world witnessed something rare, not perfection, but humanity at its strongest: respect, humility, resilience, kindness.